Welcome to Brainstorm MTG. I'm ELD, and this is Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. Here we have Food Chain up against Storm, a very interesting matchup. Storm has an incredibly raw power level, can really make great use of all of the cantrips to sculpt the perfect hand, depending on the opponent. But Food Chain, one of those decks that not necessarily in everybody's testing gauntlets, can be a bit difficult to play against. It has counter magic. It has all sorts of different ways of disrupting. And here we see Trinket Mage. That's going to indicate that we're going to see the Walking Ballista kill. And actually a main deck relic of Progenitus, which could become extremely relevant. That is going to stop Past in Flames, as well as really curtail the effectiveness of Cabal Ritual, cutting down on Threshold, and to a lesser degree, Dark Petition, potentially making it so you do not have your instants and sorceries necessary for the spell mastery to add on that 3 black mana on resolution. However, it looks like Duress is going to probably take the relic there. We got Manipulate Fate is a dangerous card. Brainstorm plus Manipulate Fate is actually not a bad turn. And you got a Shuffle along with the Brainstorm. That's going to completely transform the hand. Also get rid of that Mist Hologriffin. Murderous Cut. Probably going to be going back into the deck. Not a very good option. For those wondering why you'd even run a card like Murderous Cut, I do think it's marginal at best, but it does allow you to exile creatures in your graveyard, like Mist Hologriffin or the Scourge, Eternal Scourge, to... Oh, and Leovold. So no Manipulate Fate actually drew into a Leovold off of that Brainstorm. And a Brainstorm on the Storm side in response. See how this goes. The Food Chain side, actually pretty dangerous. Could go infinite with a Food Chain potentially. So looks like Storm's going to take advantage of this. Dark Ritualing. Lotus Petal's going to be able to tap for red. And looks like that hand is straight gas. Dark Ritual again. No more card drawing necessary. Sorry, Leovold. Now the big question here is going to be, how does the finish happen? Is it going to be Empty the Warrens or Tendrils of Agony? Empty does mean you have to pass the turn, but it is a little bit safer. I think game one, it's game one when they're tapped out, probably about as safe as it's going to get when they have a Leovold out. Difficulty of Tendrils of Agony against Leovold is each one of those tendrils will cause Leovold to trigger. So Food Chain's going to be able to draw a ton of cards. They're going to have to manage the storm count very effectively. Cabal Ritual is just adding boatloads of mana. That relic would have been tremendously impactful here. Leovold, however, very tempting. Pretty tough to hold back on a Trinket Mage to ensure that your relic resolves. And here we go, Past in Flames. Gonna go get that Tendrils now, in all likelihood. Not seeing any black mana. Yep, there we go. Could have possibly used Lion's Eye Diamond in the mix. So there's a Lotus Petal. Oh, that's his, sorry, that's his graveyard. Could have possibly used one of the tutors to go get a Lion's Eye Diamond if Empty was going to be the preferred plan. But it looks like a Tendrils for a whole bunch. See how many Force of Wills he draws. Just 2, and that's not going to be enough to stop it. Game 1, definitely much safer. Game 2, when they can draw into Flusterstorm or Mindbreak Trap, much, much more dicey with the Tendrils. Truth be told, when I was playing Storm most of last year versus decks like Grixis Control, when Deathrite Shaman was in them, or Check Pile as it was called at the time, Leovold was such a problem that I would almost always want to win with a Empty the Warrens, stripping their hand of any answers, any card drawing and just give them a single draw step to potentially rip an answer. Almost always works out. I did face defeat in a top 4 of a pretty large event when my opponent ripped one of their one-outers with that plan. But man, letting them draw a ton of cards is pretty difficult with the tendrils. Leovold just pulls so much weight there. Of course, he also shuts down all of your cantrips. Brainstorm is awful against him. Ponder, sometimes worth casting, just because you get to look at the top few cards and rearrange. But yeah, he's really backbreaking when it comes to the card selection. You pretty much have to have all of the answers all ready to go when he shows up. And he's a legitimate clock, too. I mean, he will close the game out. A little bit of support from another creature will really close things out quickly. And even by himself, you know, 3 power per turn is a pretty reasonable way to close out a game when your opponent is really hamstrung in their ability to find answers. Continued to improve this setup. Really looking forward to a, I suppose, final version. We will continue to improve the site, but we've got some improvements in mind here. Birds of Paradise again from Food Chain, Duress again from Storm. Very similar game, however this time a ton of permission. We've got a couple of surgical extractions and a Force of Will with a single blue card, which was a Manipulate Fate. That is taken. And during the draw step, looks like a surgical being fired off. Not loving that. Yeah, not loving that at all. We'll see how this plays. Definitely understand the impulse from Food Chain, wanting to know exactly how to play against Storm over the next few turns, potentially gaining the knowledge of what is best Force of Willed. But playing that even on their turn does add to their Storm. I think staying pat probably feels a lot better. We'll see how it plays out. Surgical probably at its strongest versus Storm when you're able to take their tutors. Even if they're trying to win off of Past in Flames, when they do go to chain their tutors, typically they have the 4 Infernal and a single Dark Petition. Surgical Extraction will kind of force them to have a Dark Petition. And if they don't, they're just not going to be able to find that lethal Storm spell, either Empty the Warrens or Tendrils of Agony, off of their Past in Flames. And we see here Food Chain sees an Ad Nauseam, which is in range of just being cast off of a Dark Ritual. Checking to see, is this a blue card? Now, Food Chain has the ability to hard cast Force. So it's a very interesting situation with Ad Nauseam. It may be possible to squeeze in the Ad Nauseam with an ill-timed fetch land activation, kind of cutting off the hard cast ability. Depending on the strength of the hand, may actually be worthwhile. Brainstorm, and now the hand is a mystery. Oh, is that a Sylvan Library? That is a spicy card. Seen Dark Confidant very often in Storm sideboards. Sylvan potentially generating a bunch of card advantage in this type of matchup that actually feels pretty awesome. Food Chain doesn't really pressure your life total a whole lot. As we see here with the Birds of Paradise, I mean, that's 0 power attackers, not really going to do much to set a clock. So Sylvan could really pull this game way out if that's actually what the card is. Yeah, it totally is. What a beating. That is practically a must counter. Ponder. And just all the rituals. That is real nice. Storm is sculpting a super lethal hand here. Letting Food Chain get a whole bunch of cards back. Brainstorm, and now both players going to have unknown cards. And a fetch. And it's that type of situation where it may have been worth to ritual into the ad nauseum, forcing Force Pitch blue card, depending on what else is going on in that hand. If they only have one business spell, then not really worth it. Another Brainstorm. All right, so we're actually completely away from hard casting Force at this point. Looking to get multiple copies of Force of Will with multiple blue cards. That has happened. And a Collective Brutality, I believe. And gonna see Abrupt Decay, Infernal, and Ad Nauseam. This is anybody's game. Food Chain has a bunch of permission, but Storm has a very lethal hand. Ad Nauseam, a must counter. The top of the library, additional rituals. Abrupt Decay, probably the worst card in that hand by a mile. So Infernal being taken. And Surgical is going to hit the Infernal. That is going to eliminate a lot of oops, I win draws off the top. Here we go, Dark Ritual, Ad Nauseam. And that is getting Spell Pierced. So these Lotus Petals, they are in hand. So no help against Spell Pierce, and that's a pretty back-breaking turn here. May have been possible to jam that earlier. Have that frame of reference in mind when I rewatch this. See if there was kind of a point in the game where that Ad Nauseam could have just got snuck in there. And Sylvan showing a couple of cards worth keeping. One of them a fetch land. Now digging. Looks like our life totals are lost. Looking forward to upgrading that element of the videos in a better way of keeping track of life. And here is Leovold. Abrupt Decay, going to allow him to cycle. Another Abrupt Decay, and now we've got a Tendrils of Agony. Maybe able to do a natural Tendrils down the line. Looks like 2 cards kept off of Sylvan so far. And another Leovold meets another Abrupt Decay. So Food Chain happy to run out Leovold, get an extra card off of him for now, building a wall of counters in hand. But if none of them are Flusterstorm or Mindbreak Trap, the Storm side of Tendrils may prove to be just too much. Might be a time to keep all 3 of these cards and push all in. See what happens here. Leading out with Thoughtseize. Showing 3 Force of Wills and a Collective Brutality. Just 1 counter after this resolves. This is actually a fantastic situation now. Let's see if the Storm count's going to be high enough. Another Thoughtseize. Lotus Petal, Lotus Petal. Cabal Ritual, and Tendrils of Agony. Oh, very interesting. So a non-lethal Tendrils here. I kind of like the... So it is sometimes possible to bait your opponent into using a Force of Will. I would have loved to have seen a Dark Ritual played before the Thoughtseizes. That is the type of spell that might have gotten countered, giving your opponent a chance to potentially misplay. From here, looks like Past in Flames is going to be necessary for the win. With that Tendrils in the graveyard. Relic of Progenitus, and is that a wrap? Is there another Tendrils in the deck? Pausing and thinking on this fetch land. I think we may be moving on to game number 2. Or game number 3. There we go. So no win condition left, just a single Tendrils. Nothing wrong with that. I think that's a totally reasonable way to build the deck. But yeah, when you are on a singleton Tendrils plan, you've got to be very judicious with its use. Substitution being made. See how Storm adjusts here. Storm, one of the archetypes that people thought was going to really suffer losing Gitaxian Probe. But seems to be just as well positioned as ever. 8 discard spells, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Duress for the most part. May actually be not strictly worse in many matchups. It does really cut down on several of the turn 1 wins involving multiple probes. You know, but those are potentially games you were going to win anyways. Usually if you're probing that early and seeing your opponent doesn't have any way of stopping you, tough to say that you wouldn't necessarily win that game. I'm not exactly calling it win more, but those were some of the softer games. The kind of longer, grindier, more difficult to play games. Probe wasn't really at its finest in those matchups, whereas the additional discard spells can be very good in that. Here we see Ponder. Good enough to keep, potentially concerning, and Relic of Progenitus, really the key card in this matchup so far. Game 1, it was duressed, allowing for Storm to win. Game 2, it got rid of the Tendrils, meaning we have a Game 3. There was no coming back from that. Wouldn't it be wild if Storm was just too fast for Relic here? That is almost certainly not going to be the case here. We see Ponder. Looks like Food Chain will get an untap step. Storm. I'm just going to pass. Elective Brutality. Infernal Tutor taken. And that is the card that you want to be surgicaling in this matchup more often than not. Preordain. Neither one of those cards is going to get you where you need to be. It's got plenty of gas, multiple Lion's Eye Diamond. Mana's not the issue. It's what to do with the mana. And here we see a Thoughtseize along with into a hand with Food Chain and double Leovold. That looks like a polluted Delta. I thought it was Bajuka Bog for a second. That would be unfortunate. And here we go with Leovold. Gonna need to naturally draw Preordain. just scrying. Bottom, no card draw thanks to Leovold. Ponder and Preordained still kind of live. They at least set up future turns. It's better than bricking 3 turns in a row. But still feels pretty bad. Relic being activated. Storm getting rid of Infernal Tutor correctly, making sure it's not going to be a target for surgical extraction down the line. Oh, we got a new one, guys. I don't know what that card is. Let me know in the comments. Something with 2 counters on it. Fetch into Sylvan. Ooh, that's not gonna work out. Let's see how this goes. This is gonna be gross if he activates Sylvan. Oh, graphic. So he's gonna have to... He's going to be taking some damage here. A bunch of mana artifacts and duress. Storm 5. So with Leovold and Sylvan Library, you don't actually get the cards in hand, so you're actually not putting them back. So you're taking a bunch of extra damage. But it may not be relevant here. We see some rituals. Force of Will. And just playing out a ton of accelerants and calling it a day. There we go, Storm. Just building a little bit of blood pressure on the other side of the table before extending the hand. And Food Chain taking down Storm in a few entertaining games there. All right, thanks for watching.